Hello, everyone. I'm Cecilia Clarke. I'm President and CEO of Brooklyn Community Foundation. Welcome to our fourth webinar about the Brooklyn COVID Response Fund. Thank you so much for joining us. I know it's such a crazy time, and we really deeply appreciate you taking the time out to learn a little bit about the work that we've been doing for the past 8 weeks. So I want to start by thanking all of you for joining. And I know that there are donors listening right now, and I want to thank you so much for donating to this fund. We've just been really moved by the outpouring of support from Brooklyn really stepping up for Brooklyn, and it's a bit of a bright spot in a pretty dark time. So thank you. So we started this webinar series because we wanted to focus on not only just the general information about what we've been doing with this fund, but some of the key aspects of this crisis that we've been learning about through our grant making and through working with our community-based partners. And so today we are focused on the economic impact on low-wage workers. And joining us will be Mohamed Attia from Street Vendor Project. He'll be interviewed by Marcella, Tillett, our Vice President of Program and Partnerships. I also want to thank the people that you don't see right now, but they are the ones who are really the power behind these webinars, which is Jamila Syed and Jenny Walski on our staff, doing a great job promoting these webinars and getting them off the ground. So just a little bit of background before we get started hearing from Marcella and Mohamed. We launched this fund. We were actually one of the very first funders in the country to launch a COVID response fund. We knew right away as this county's community foundation that COVID was going to hit us very, very hard. And very sadly, that anticipation has come true. In case you didn't know, we are very much the epicenter of this crisis right now. Kings County has the highest fatality rate in the country. It's very, very serious, but I'm really proud of the way that Brooklyn has stepped up. So we started 8 weeks ago, March 12th, and in a way to try to galvanize Brooklyn to be as generous as possible, and also to try to get money out as quickly as possible for emergency funding. The programs team has been phenomenal. It's the team Marcella runs, and we've gotten about $1.5 million out in emergency funding, which is extraordinary. Those grants go out weekly. We've been told by nonprofits that we have by far the easiest grant maker right now. We have only two questions on the application. So we really are trying to focus on reducing burdens to nonprofits so that they can step up and do the hard work in the face of this crisis. And in addition to the emergency money, we have also made a point of sticking by our grantees, our regular grantees, and giving them a little extra money. I know that there are a lot of stories of foundations who actually kind of pull back as their endowments lose money. But we actually felt the opposite. We felt, let's stick by our nonprofits, and we actually gave them a little bit of money to really help them get through this crisis. Because as you all know, the sustainability of these incredible community-based organizations is very much on the line. So altogether, we've given out almost $2.5 million in the past 8 weeks. I also just want to announce a wonderful milestone that we hit last night. In fact, we passed $3 million in funds raised for this fund. And we're just undone by how generous that is. Of course, we have goals to raise about twice that much money because as this Borough's Community Foundation, we are very much here for the long term. And the impact of this crisis is going to continue and shift, and we have to be ready for that. And we plan on doing everything we can for Brooklyn. So I want to turn this over to Marcella and Mohamed. I think you're going to be very interested in what they have to say. And please, also a reminder, we are really delighted if you want to ask questions. There's on the bottom, you can see there's a prompt to do that, and we will try to get to as many of your questions as possible. Thank you so much for joining us. And Marcella and Mohamed, welcome.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. Good afternoon, all, and thank you for joining us today. As Cecilia mentioned, my name is Marcella, Vice President of Programs and Partnerships here at the Foundation. The Brooklyn COVID-19 Response Fund, as Cecilia mentioned, was created to address the disproportionate health, social, and economic impacts of the pandemic on communities of color in Brooklyn. We do that through supporting Brooklyn serving nonprofits with grant making, capacity building, and advocacy support. And like all of our work, the fund is deeply rooted in our values of racial equity and justice, which means we prioritize funding grassroots and frontline organizations who are often overlooked by traditional philanthropy. And we're committed to investing in these organizations now more than ever. The fund is currently providing immediate response grants, as Cecilia mentioned, and our current areas of focus for the fund are food access, healthcare access, community safety and liberty, and support for priority populations such as older adults, immigrant communities, people experiencing domestic violence, vulnerable youth, people with compromised immune systems, people who are LGBTQIA/GNC, people who are formerly or currently incarcerated, people who are homeless, and low-wage and non-traditional workers. We understand that these are urgent times, and the fund has been positioned to respond quickly, and in future phases will focus on longer-term recovery and rebuilding efforts. Just one logistical note before we jump into the discussion. Please use the Q&A tab on the bottom of the screen to submit any questions you may have during the talk. And towards the end, we will, Mohamed and I and Cecilia will come back and we'll respond to all of your questions. Okay, now on to today's topic. Again, we understand that this pandemic and the recession will be far-reaching. Its impacts on communities and individuals will be deep, particularly those that are already disenfranchised, marginalized, and oppressed. This is why, since beginning the fund, one of our primary areas of focus has been on low-wage and non-traditional workers. The fund is currently supporting critical nonprofits focused on Brooklyn's workers, including Gender Equality Law Center, which is delivering rapid response legal services to low-wage workers impacted by coronavirus, many of whom are women of color and or undocumented immigrants. We're supporting Hot Bread Kitchen, which is supporting low-income food industry workers with a resource hotline and direct financial assistance. And we're also supporting the Laundry Workers Center, which is providing immediate relief for essential laundromat workers from virus exposure and employer exploitation, including advocating for mandatory paid sick days, up-to-date health and workers' rights information, and direct financial aid. So those are just a few of the examples of organizations the fund is supporting around workers' rights and worker support for these very vulnerable workers. And I encourage you all to check out the full list of grantees on our website, brooklyncommunityfoundation.org. There's a COVID-19 tab. The grantees are updated every week. Also, the foundation is incredibly proud to support the work of the Street Vendor Project's relief and advocacy work happening right now. Mohamed is here today to talk to us further about the work being done by the Street Vendor Project. And I'd like to again thank him for joining us today. There he is. How you doing, Mohamed?
I'm fine, Marcella. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. So your members are in a very unique position of being adversely impacted by the halting of our economy, as well as the shelter-in-place orders, since their livelihoods rely so heavily on high levels of movement in public spaces. Can you give us some examples of the challenges your members are facing right now?
Sure. So it all started in the beginning of March, I would say in the first week or so, when most street vendors have been like reaching out to us and asking what the hell is going on, what's happening here, why no people are out there in the street, we're losing a lot of business. And I would say around March 15th, perhaps everyone I know in my circle completely stopped working. We have been calling members since the beginning of this pandemic to check in with them and see who are operating and who's not. And most people have stopped working completely because of the lack of business. Basically, there's no foot traffic in the streets. Nobody is walking around. So how would they make business? And very few people are still operating. I would say very few people like fruit and vegetable vendors, the fresh produce vendors who are still operating in residential areas. They still have some business running. Of course, it's not as before. They have lost a lot of their income, a lot of their daily sales, but at least they can survive. But we estimate that 90% of vendors have stopped vending completely. And that is like a really big challenge for them, because vending is perhaps the only, like I would say in most cases, it's the only revenue, the only income that the whole family has, whether it's only one provider in the family or it's the couple working on the vending business. So street vending is the only platform they provide income for their families.
Can you talk a little bit about who your members are? You know, you all represent tens of thousands of people engaged in street vendor work, these amazing kind of super small micro businesses that make New York City and Brooklyn such a beautiful place. Can you talk about who your members are?
Sure. So our members are street vendors, people who sell in the streets, people who sell anything and everything from fresh produce, halal food, waffles and things, mangoes, the sliced mangoes on Brooklyn Bridge that you sometimes find them in the summer. All these are our members, and the vast majority of them are immigrants. And of course, a big number of them, a significant number of them are undocumented. You can see single mothers, you can find families, immigrant families running the business. You can find military veterans. You will find everything. I mean, the vending community is as diverse as New York City. From every culture, from every background, you will find a street vendor everywhere you go in New York City, and of course here in Brooklyn too. So that's our community.
Can you talk a little bit about how Street Vendor Project has had to adapt its work over the past 2 months to meet these new pressing needs of your members?
Sure, it has been a challenge for us, especially that given the whole circumstances with the vending situation now and how vendors are dealing with the pandemic and how vendors are dealing with the government support. I mean, the main challenge during this pandemic is not only like not getting any income, but not being able to access any government programs. All the government loan and government grants that are out there for small businesses, they are completely excluded from street vendors. Street vendors don't qualify for any of them, giving all the criteria that the SBS and the SBA will ask for. So that has been a real challenge. And for us at the Street Vendor Project, we did our best since day one. We have been working remotely for quite some time now since this outbreak. And we're doing everything we can to reach out to our members. We have been like phone banking, I would say every day, using all the means to communicate with our members, like through social media, creating WhatsApp groups based on the languages, WeChat groups for the Mandarin speaking folks, using the social media all the time. I would say our leaders have been meeting at least twice a month on Zoom, which has been a challenge, of course, to go over everything on how to set up Zoom and how to use it with our leaders. That has been a challenge also. But the main thing is connecting our members to resources. That has been the main challenge, especially when you get a call from someone who says, I'm undocumented, I didn't receive a stimulus check, I don't know what to do now. And the resources then are very limited. But of course, we have like great partners we work with, like I have to mention Business Center for New Americans, the Hebrew Free Loan Society. They have been like great partners who would accept people with no credit score, with no documents, with no social security number, and they will give them loans to support them during such a pandemic. So that has been so helpful. But also, I would say everything like connecting people to food banks and food pantries, connecting people to apply for health coverage programs that they would be qualified for, helping them with the pandemic unemployment assistance. That you can imagine how complicated this application is. And for a lot of people, it's a challenge to fill up such an application.
Something that's so, I think, rich about Street Vendor Project's approach is that you provide all of these robust, very kind of personalized services to your members, while also speaking with the advocacy voice from what you learned from their experiences. I know you all had recently and are still focused on pushing through a bill in the council around the access to permits and making sure that your members are able to do their work in a way that is able to continue to support that livelihood. Can you talk a little bit more about your advocacy work?
Sure. So our advocacy work, I would say, is our main thing. Like besides all the services we provide, besides legal services we provide, because we believe it's the way to make the change, the way to change all these problems. I mean, having a lawyer to go fight a ticket is not going to resolve the problem if you keep getting the same ticket every day. So our main goal, and that has been the main goal for the past 6 years, I would say, is to lift the caps on permits and licenses for street vendors. Now, for food vendors, I mean, a lot of people are not aware of the issue. For food vendors, there has been a cap on the number of permits since the 80s. And that number hasn't really increased for like 4 or 5 decades now. For about 4 decades, we haven't seen any more permits coming from the city. So street vendors are dealing with an underground market where they pay a lot of money. They pay like tens of thousands of dollars every 2 years when they renew their permit. And it is really frustrating to hear stories like at the very beginning of this pandemic, I received a call from one of our members who said he just paid $23,000 a week ago to renew his permit. And now the cart is sitting in the garage, so he cannot even go out and make business. Imagine if we were in a different world and have a different vending system where that person ideally would go to the city and pay $200 to renew his permit. He would have had that $23,000 now in savings to support him during such a pandemic. So of course, advocacy is our main goal. And now we are really pushing hard our city council to step up and pass this legislation. We already have 30 co-sponsors on the legislation. We had 29 council members and the public advocate. We just had a hearing with the city council last year about this legislation. There was a hearing last week. We joined the hearing and we testified like now is the right time to pass this legislation because now people are really struggling and we don't want them to go back to work and start their business from scratch while they are dealing with the same system, while they still have to go pay the $25,000 to someone to use their permit, while they are still risking getting arrested every day they go out or get $1,000 ticket for selling without a permit.
I'm going to remind our participants to please enter your questions using the Q&A function. And I'm going to toss one more question to you about the impact of the fund before moving on to questions from our viewers and participants. Considering all of the critical work you're doing right now and that you've been continuing to do at Street Vendors Project, can you talk a little bit about the impact of the immediate response grant you've received from Brooklyn's the Brooklyn COVID-19 Response Fund?
Yeah, sure. Well, I really want to thank you for this grant. It's super important and super, super helpful for our communities because I would say everyone we talked to in the past 8 weeks, their main concern is getting cash assistance. Like nobody has savings to rely on. Nobody have a safety net. Nobody can access these government programs that are like very complicated to reach and most people don't qualify for it. So I really want to thank you for that because it was an opportunity for us to support our members with cash assistance immediately. And that's what we have been doing. I know that we have received a $10,000 grant from the community, the Brooklyn Community Foundation. So I really want to thank you for that. I also want to thank you for the $2,500 matching grant. That was really powerful and was really emphasizing our efforts to, yes, you can donate more, you can support more along with our crowdfunding. So I mean, with these $12,500, we were able to support 41 members.
Wow.
41 gift cards to just put food on their table to support them during this pandemic. So that was like really, really helpful because that's what people are asking for. People don't need a handout. People don't need a flyer. People maybe don't need like some sympathy from some people. They actually need actual help. They need help, literally. They need the cash. So I really want to thank you for that.
Thanks so much. And we're so grateful for the amazing work that our organization is doing right now, and you know how you always have shown up in this work. I also want to ask about, you know, we're 2 months in right? We're 2 months into the impacts of the pandemic in Brooklyn, in New York City, in the US. In Brooklyn, because the impact has been so deep, we are still very much in this immediate response mode, because we're still seeing high rates of infection. We're still seeing new cases. We're still seeing hospitalizations and just immense numbers of deaths every day. So it may be challenging to think about what's coming next and what resilience and recovery and rebuilding might look like. But I'm wondering if you all have any thoughts, or if you can see that far ahead of us, where we might be going and what we might need in order to come through this and rebuild what Brooklyn looks like in this new world we're going to see.
Well, it's a very challenging point, and everyone now thinking about now what's next. Yeah, we have been here for 2 months. We're gonna get through this, hopefully sooner than later. But what's gonna happen next? How life would look like later? And for a lot of communities, the situation has been like really terrible. I would say a lot of people are so unsure. They are so uncertain about what's gonna happen next. A lot of people are so worried about their jobs, their businesses. We have heard that an estimate of about 50% of restaurants perhaps might close. What that means to a lot of people, what that means to thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of people who are working in these restaurants today, what's going to happen in the future? So I think it's a very big question that we all need to think about. What are the next steps we need to take now that will just support us in the next few months and help us through the recovery process? We should think the recovery process will take some time. And that's what we are hearing from our communities. Like everyone is like, yes, we really wish that everything will open tomorrow and the state will just go back to normal, but it's not gonna happen in the near future.
Thank you. So Mohamed, I want to take a question from our viewers. We have a question from Catherine. How many clients or constituents do you have? And do you have an estimate of how much total income has been lost by this sector of the NYC economy? Do you have an idea of the impact on lost income? And of course, you know how many clients you have and all that.
It's a very interesting question. So I want to thank Catherine for that. So that there are about 20,000 individuals operating and selling in New York City streets. And that's, again, every street vendor, every person who work on a cart or a truck or a tiny cart on a small table. So those are the individuals. The Street Vendor Project, we have more than 2,300 members, but of course not all of them are active because these members have been perhaps active at some point and they stopped coming or they changed the job. So these members have been there in the organization since 2001. But now we have several hundred members who are active, at least 400 members that we are in touch with, I would say, and every month come to our meetings, come to our actions. We communicate with them using all the communication tools we have. So that's the clientele we have. That's our constituency. And when we talk about the economic loss, it's really hard to imagine how much it is. Like, it's really hard to imagine when we really know that 90% of vendors have stopped working. And we came to this estimation because we have walked in the streets. We've been driving all across the 5 boroughs, and we have seen the normally busy streets with vendors, that the block that has about 10, 15 vendors in it doesn't have anyone. We went to the commissaries, and I would say every commissary I stopped by is closed. The commissaries are the garages where the cars park. So when the commissary is closed, nobody's operating. You can imagine that those 50 cars or 50 trucks in the commissary are out of business. So we believe the economic impact is super, super huge.
Okay, thank you for that reflection. Welcome back, Cecilia. Come on back into the conversation.
Thanks, Marcella. I had a similar question, Mohamed. I have 2 questions, actually, of course. So the first is primarily what neighborhoods in Brooklyn does your work focus on? Maybe it doesn't, but I'm just kind of curious which neighborhoods, which specific populations. And then, so that was question number 1. And question number 2 was, you touched a little bit on what it means to be undocumented in the face of this crisis. It sounded like a majority, or certainly a large portion of the people that you work with are undocumented, and kind of what are some of the double and triple threats for that population, which of course Brooklyn has an incredibly high number. So those are my two questions.
Sure. So in terms of neighborhoods, I would say like all Brooklyn perhaps, but the main neighborhoods, I would focus usually on Sunset Park, Bushwick, Williamsburg, downtown Brooklyn, and of course Bay Ridge. So these are the most, I would say, populated neighborhoods with street vendors. Sunset Park has a wonderful vending scene. When you walk on Fifth Avenue, anywhere between the 40th and like 65th Street, you will see vendors in every corner. And it's very sad to drive there or walk there now and don't see that. That's very, very sad scene to see in Sunset Park. We have seen Bushwick, Williamsburg, downtown Brooklyn, all these neighborhoods. Bay Ridge, although it doesn't have a lot of vendors, not a ton of vendors work there, but I would say that a ton of vendors live there. Like I can tell you that hundreds of vendors, especially like who are originally from Egypt, Morocco, they usually live in Bay Ridge area. So that's the neighborhoods we are covering. Now, when we talk about undocumented people, and it's true, I think you put it very well, Cecilia, like, yes, it's double and triple threat. It's not only you're losing your business, you're losing your job, you're losing your like income, and you don't have any other resources, you don't have any other safety net to rely on. But then you face another threat from the landlords who are knocking your door every day asking for the rent. And when you don't have the rent, okay, I'm gonna kick you out. And then people are also terrified about the whole situation with the public charge. Now people are thinking, can I apply for this? Can I apply for this? What about the public charge? What about ICE coming and get me and knock my door? So a lot of threats, a lot of layers of threats that our communities are disappointing to see the city government not doing anything about it. They always talk about our sanctuary city. Well, I'm sorry to say that street vendors don't feel safe in our cities anymore. Our communities don't feel that this is a sanctuary city for them. When the least the administration can do, which is legalizing their work, they are not doing it. You can imagine now people will have to be working every day in the next few months to just operate and to cover their losses and to pay back their debt if they have any, and how people would do that when their work is considered illegal and they are facing a risk to be arrested every day.
Mohamed, just quickly, because this has now come up in our second webinar, we spoke about the impact of COVID on immigrant communities in Brooklyn. We spoke with Lorena from Mixteca in Sunset Park, and she painted this just very grim and sad picture of undocumented immigrants dying at home because, of course, they're too scared to go out. And so it just is incredibly sad. But one of the things that she also mentioned a couple of times was this public charge issue. And could you say in the simplest of ways for the participants on this webinar, really what that public charge is, what that means?
Sure. So from my understanding to the public charge is that it prohibits immigrants for getting their immigration status if they relied on any public assistance program. So for instance, now if I'm undocumented and I have an immigration case within my family member, for example, and I'm like applying for Medicaid, or I'm getting food stamps, or I'm getting SNAP, I'm getting any public assistance from the government, my immigration case my application will be denied and I will never be eligible to get my residence status. And that is like really devastating. Even like I had to talk to immigration lawyers to figure this out, to know exactly what's considered under the public charge policy and what's not. Because I learned, for example, that the pandemic unemployment assistance doesn't really fall under that. So if I'm undocumented and I'm eligible to apply, I should do that. But of course, undocumented people won't really know that. They'll just think, oh, any public assistance program will be so scary. You can't touch this. If you touch this, you lose your immigration status. Right. So it's a very complex situation.
Right. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you so much, Mohamed. Just being mindful of the time, I think we are right at time. And again, I just want to thank you for your time this afternoon and helping us better understand the impact that COVID-19 in terms of the health, social, economic aspects of the pandemic is having on our street vendor neighbors and the communities that Street Vendor Project serves and really lifts up in their work. So I thank you for the incredible work you're doing, and really hope that you and your family are well. And I'll give Cecilia the final remarks.
Thank you, Marcella.
Sure.
And thank you
for
so
having
much,
me.
Mohamed. And thank you for the work you're doing. It's really impressive. I want
Thank
to
you.
encourage everybody right now on the webinar. We have 2 more webinars coming up. Very exciting on May 21st. We are going to be featuring Heather McGee, who's a phenomenal activist, advocate, thinker, talking head. Last year, she was also our Justice Fellow. She will be speaking about the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on the African American community, which makes up almost 37% of Brooklyn's population. I'm sure that you've all been reading a lot about that, and I think that she'll be able to give some real nuance and understanding to why there is this disproportionate impact and how important it is. And then following that, on June 4th, we will be speaking about the impact on the elderly population in Brooklyn, which of course we all know, certainly from a health standpoint, what an impact this disease has had on elders, but also just in terms of their social connections and their networks, and just kind of the devastating crisis that's facing elders right now. So those are the 2 webinars coming up. And if you forgot all that information, it's fine because it's on our website. And then finally, I just want to say, please support this fund. I know you all knew that that was coming, but I really just can't emphasize that enough, because first of all, one thing you should know is that 100% of every dollar that comes in is going back out. We're not taking anything from the top here, and we are trying to get it out as quickly as possible. And I think that, as you heard from Mohamed, I think that one of the things that really makes us distinct is that we are reaching the grassroots. We are truly trying to support people like Mohamed and the Street Vendors Project, who might not otherwise be able to access kind of larger philanthropy that's happening across the river. I know there are a lot of articles about this big philanthropy that's happening, but the reality is, I'm certainly not confident that it's going to really reach the grassroots in Brooklyn. And that is who we know, and that is who we are giving to, because they are really, as you heard from Mohamed, the most trusted and the most community embedded organizations who are literal lifelines to our fellow Brooklynites. So I want to say that, of course, and again, a big thank you to those who already have donated, and enjoy the rest of your day and your weekend, and stay safe and healthy. And again, a big thank you to Mohamed and Marcella.